This week, God just laid this message on my heart. And I feel like so many of us need to hear it this week. And so our main text is going to be in Hebrews chapter 6. But I want to talk to you about the story that Cameron just read. The story about David. David was the king of Israel, but he wasn't really. You see, what happened is that he was anointed king of Israel, but the current king didn't really care for that very much. And so as a result, David spent a large portion of his life on the run, running and terrified. And eventually he found success hiding from his mentor and father-in-law, turned it into his worst enemy who's hunting him across the countryside, who had this terrible habit of throwing spears at him. And eventually he's forced to take refuge with the king of the Philistines. Achish is his name. And so David, basically, he's grateful to Achish for taking him in. So David goes to Achish and he says, hey, let me help you fight your battles. Let me go with you. And Achish is like, you know what? You've always been good by me. We've always been able to work things out. So let's go. And then all the other lords of the Philistines were like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is the guy who's killed a whole bunch of us. Not okay. So here is David all ready to go, leading his men to go into battle, to walk with someone together, and ultimately is turned away and rejected. It's hard to take rejection. And so having made the trek up to go fight this battle, him and his men, they march home only to feel the weight of sadness. Comes upon his city, which is the hideout, which he's been hiding out. The city is called Ziklag. And when he comes upon this place, Ziklag, what he sees is that the city is completely destroyed and been burned to the ground. All the men's wives and children are gone. They've been carried off, kidnapped, human trafficked, whatever you want to say. And there is just sadness. Everything that they had was gone. And then David's men, lashing out in anger, turn on him and are ready to stone him. Talk about a bad day. Some have pointed to this day as the worst day of David's life. I'm not sure I can argue. What about you? What has been the worst day of your life? Many of you have experienced one of those worst days of your life this year, if not the worst day. Many of us have felt hopeless in the face of everything that has gone on in 2020. Rick Warren identifies what he calls the top 10 reasons for hopelessness. Because I feel like that's something that is just plaguing us all, as all of us are just feeling so hopeless. COVID is on the rise. The election is still, who knows? There's so much that is so confusing. There's so much that we cling to looking for hope. And Rick Warren does this. He lays this out in a book of his. He lays out, he calls it top 10 reasons why people feel hopeless. First reason he talks about is that you feel alone/abandoned. You have no one to turn to. Spouses, you can feel alone with the person lying next to your spouse in bed, can't you? When we struggle with that hopelessness of feeling alone and abandoned, and you can be completely alone. Many of you today probably feel alone, even though you're surrounded by people who love you and care about you. Loneliness is such a terrible thing. It's a terrible struggle. You've been abandoned and left behind. Many of you have felt that this year. Separated, quarantined, forced to stay inside your house. Many of you have struggled with that. Your life seems out of control. My poor wife, she's married to me. And she always lets me drive. You want to know why? Because I'm the worst backseat driver.
And here's the thing, it's I've gotten better to kind of hold my tongue and everything, but she's just like, I just don't want any part of it. Like, it's better for our marriage if I just let you just be in control, because we hate being out of control. I don't like the fact that if I see something that I would react to differently than my wife would, I will shut my eyes and grab onto things, and it's not good for her. And so, but here's the thing though, is how often do we feel like our life is out of control? Uncertainty, not knowing what is going to happen and what is going to come next. You don't have control. You feel hopeless because you can't get to where you want to go. You don't seem like you have a purpose. Maybe many of you have thought some of these thoughts of, will anybody miss me if I were not here? What's the point? Or grieving a loss. There's so many hurting people that are grieving, whether it be the loss of a loved one, or how about the loss of a job, a loss of a relationship? When you cling to something and you get hope from it and it's taken away, you lose that and you struggle with it. You don't have what you need. I don't know if you've ever been short on rent before, but I have. And it's scary. Not being able to afford food or relying on other people to bring you food, and ultimately you find out what you really miss. Maybe it's more emotional than that. You never had the support of a parent. The basic needs, that you don't have them met. Or maybe you've done something wrong and you have no hope as a result of it. You know, shame and guilt are powerful, powerful things. There's a movie that came out in 2015 called Captive. The main character is a woman by the name Ashley, and the thing about this movie is a true story. It's about this woman who just felt like her life was completely hopeless. She had lost her daughter because of her drug use. Her husband had died in a drug deal gone bad. And when she was taken hostage, she just figured that God was punishing her for what she had done. The fact of the matter is that so often we feel the same way, don't we? That we must be punished. We have no hope because we're stuck in that guilt and that shame. Maybe we've been deeply wounded, betrayed by a friend or a spouse. And we let that bitterness and hopelessness develop in our lives. When we're deeply wounded, we don't want to trust anymore, and we can't see anything out of it. While being pulled in the wrong direction. Temptation. When you know what you're doing is wrong and you just can't seem to stop. And you continue going back habitually over and over and over again, it can lead to hopelessness. Or about hounded by fear. One of life's most basic needs is to feel safe. Does anybody truly feel safe right now? We step outside and we're afraid that we're going to catch COVID and die. There's a lot of that. And some of that fear goes beyond just the virus. And the final thing, top 10 reasons, probably the worst top 10 list I've ever heard in my life, is when it looks like it's defeat. I remember coaching a high school football game. I remember the head coach and I disagreed on the game plan, and ultimately the head coach's game plan failed. I had a better game plan, and so at halftime he let me install it, and we rolled with it. And I remember seeing that it was working, and I was so excited. But it didn't work. we lost the game still because the players just didn't think they could score enough points to come back. Do you feel like you're defeated? Do you feel like there's no way of coming back? I would imagine that each and every one of us feels at least one of those things, and many of us feel many of those. We feel like absolute hopelessness. I think about David. And that feeling of safety gone, that feeling of the place knowing there's loss of relationships, everything that he experienced was gone in that moment. And so the question is for us is that where do we turn when we need to feel hope again? Where do we go? What are our survival skills? The fact of the matter is that we're really good at people as surviving. But the problem is that where do you turn to find hope in hopeless situations? For many of us, it's the physical pleasure of the things of this world. Food, alcohol, drugs, sex, entertainment. Entertainment, especially nowadays. I don't want to watch the news, so I just turn on something else because it distracts me from the situations that I see. How many of you escape in that way? We mindlessly scroll through Facebook because we don't want to deal with the true feelings that we have. How about we turn to power? Many of us feel powerless oftentimes and when we're lacking hope, and so we turn to the things that bring us success. I'll be honest, one of the things I do that I really love doing is I love sweeping and mopping the floors in my house. You want to know why? Because it's simple. Because at the end of the day, I finish sweeping, I can look at a floor and be like, that looks nice. I did something. And then my kids come in. When we look for the things of success, the things that we go to, we look for those. And if those things become too much for us, we focus on that success. It wouldn't be very good if all I did was sweep and mop the floors every day, although my wife may say amen. I mean, the fact of the matter is that these are the things that happen. We search for money because we use that to fill that hopelessness that we have. We search for achievement. You can't win at playing the game of life, so what do? You change the game to something that makes sense, escaping it all. So often, we'll change things about ourselves completely just to make us feel better. If it's popular, we'll just go about and do it. And we get success and accolades for it, and we're praised for it, and we feel that, and it brings us joy. Maybe we turn to love. That idea of romance, relationships, family, and even myself. Big one of those buzzwords nowadays is self-love. How can I show myself self-love so that I can feel good about myself? But all you're really doing is just escaping your problems. And here's the thing with all the things I listed out, is that these might make you feel better temporarily, but they all end or fail and fall short and leave you needing more. And so you give more. And those things that you do to escape, they take more. And ultimately, you're stuck in this cycle of just hopelessness. Finding temporary moments and continuing on. You see, here's the thing. Every single person goes about that. And I think of David in 1 Samuel chapter 30, and he's not the only one who's crying out loud. All his men, these hardened warriors, are just weeping till they have no more strength anymore over what they've lost and the hopelessness. And what do? They turn and they say, you know what will make us feel better in this moment? We'll kill our leader. We'll pick up stones and we'll stone David because it'll make us feel better. But David does something. After he weeps, after he mourns, he seeks God. And he turns to God and he seeks him. He puts on what's called an ephod. Basically, it was a garment that the priest would wear when trying to communicate with God. And so David puts it on and he goes and he prays and he seeks God. And David receives a word from God as to what he should do. Ultimately, the story goes is that God blesses them and says, go chase them down and we'll give them into your hand. And even when it seems like it's hopelessness, as 600 men are running after being exhausted, are running across the countryside looking for their loved ones, to the point where 200 of them, a third of them are physically exhausted and can't go any farther. They still accomplish their goal. And all the people, their family, their loved ones are recovered. See, God has a better plan for us. A better plan that I think is summed up perfectly in Hebrews chapter 6. Follow along with me as I read in Hebrews chapter 6, starting in verse 13. When God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore to himself, saying, surely I will bless you and multiply you. Think about that if you can remember back to your Sunday school class days. The story of Abraham, if you're not familiar, is this guy who basically is just minding his own business, and God shows up to him one day and says, I'm going to make you a promise. But if I'm going to make you this promise, what's going to need to happen is that you're going to need to leave everything behind and follow me. And so by following him, what he does is he runs across the countryside following God, and God continues to make promises to him over and over and over to him again. For when God made a promise to Abraham, he promised him by swearing above no other name. How many of you make a promise? Like, I have kids all the time, right? Like, yeah, I do have kids all the time. They always are there, right? But the fact of the matter is that all the time they come to me, and what they say to me is they say, all right, like, I'm going to do this. And I go, oh, are you really? It's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to clean my room. Sure you are. And sometimes they'll even like, I promise I'm going to do this. I'm like, oh, okay. And what are you going to swear? And it'd be something, right? If they said to me, like, I promise, that if I don't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. Well, that's not really much of a promise, is it? And so here's the thing. When you when you promise by something, you promise by something greater than yourself. If my kid came to me and said, I promise that I am going to clean my room, or else I'll do it tomorrow. How about, I promise I'm going to clean my room, or else I will clean all the bathrooms the next day, and then I'll take all my allowance and give it back to you, everything you've ever owed, if I don't clean my room. Well, that sounds more like a promise, right? We always try to up it to the next level, and it's always we think of us as people making those promises. We don't think of God making those promises. And God makes that promise to this guy, Abraham. He swore to him, and he swore by the greatest name above all other names, himself. He swears to Abraham. He says, I make this promise that I will bless you and I will multiply you. I will make you this great nation, that your descendants will be these great nations. And you got to remember, Abraham was an old guy. He was in his 90s by the time he finally had a child. In fact, from that moment that he makes that promise, God makes that promise, Abraham waits 25 years. Abraham waits, verse 15, and thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves. And in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. Because when we see the word oath used in the Bible, what that is it's a legal term. For us, think about it like we're going to draw up a contract, right? I just got a new phone yesterday. I've been disconnected. It's been kind of crazy. And everything I do, there's like, I have to take an oath of some sort, right? Like, if I'm going to use my iPhone, I have to, I don't know, I think I might have promised my firstborn child or something. Sorry, Mary Kate. You know, I mean, I don't know, right? But this is the thing, right? Like, there is this oath. This is this final confirmation. This is a legally binding agreement. And I want you to see these words in verse 17 and 18 because this is so amazing. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise of the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we have fled for refuge, might have strong encouragement in the hold fast to hope set before us. What the author of Hebrews is basically saying here is that there are two things. There's two things that God has done. There are these two unchangeable things because what God has done is he has his purpose and his desire. And it is this unchangeable character of his purpose that if he makes a promise, if he says something, if he sets his mind to do it, he does not change his mind. And then the second thing he does is that he will guarantee it with an oath, a legally binding thing. Why would the God of the universe do any of this? Because God wants it to be clear that he does not lie. How many of you have been lied to? If you don't raise your hand, you're lying. What if I told you you could talk to someone who would never lie to you? It'd be refreshing, wouldn't it be? Someone that you could rely on to always tell you the truth. Someone who could basically look into you and basically say, hey, you know, this is the struggle I'm having. What do you think? And they would tell you the truth. God does not lie. What an amazing promise that we have in that God does not lie. And why does he not lie? As this text says right here, because we can have refuge in him, have strong encouragement, and hold fast the hope set before us. You see, God makes a promise to us, and that promise is in Jesus Christ. And that promise is this, is that no matter what happens in this life, no matter what the case is, there is something that you can bind yourself to, that you can weather every storm. And he goes on in verse 19, the author of Hebrews, and he does this amazing thing. He uses this great illustration. We have a sure and a steadfast anchor of our soul, the hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone, the forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now, we don't have time to go into Melchizedek and talk about that. I don't really have time to go into what the holies of holies is, but basically think about this, right? The God of the universe, who has been set apart from us, that there has been a physical divide because of sin. In the temple, there was a physical curtain, and there was holies of holies. Again, we got to move past it pretty quickly. But the fact is that God was set aside and set apart, and he was distant from us. But when Jesus came and died on the cross, that curtain, that veil was torn, and now through Jesus, we have the only person that we can count on in this life that will never tell us a lie. The only person that will truly give us any sense of hope, that we can tie onto him like an anchor. I don't know if you've ever seen an anchor before. But anchors are so important to a boat. Because when a storm comes up, you easily blow away, be set adrift, be lost out at sea. But that anchor will sit there and it will root you. It will stick into the ground. It will stick there and it will be that confidence that you have, something that you can stick yourself to and say, this is it. I can be secure in this. The biggest anchor in the world is like the size of our church building. That's big. It's like 70 million tons. The link of a chain is like the size of the stage. And that is nothing compared to the anchor that we have in Jesus Christ. Many of you have come in today and you're hurting. You are lacking hope. And you have looked to places to hook your anchor to. Ultimately, you'll be failed by all of them. There is only one place that you can hook an anchor to find hope, and that is in Jesus Christ and the promises that he makes. You know what some of those promises are? John 10:10, I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. That he wants us to have life and have a life that is full in him. That we are not going to be without lacking or without need. That we're not going to be hopeless. That we can hook onto him and have life and have it abundantly. Mark 9, verse 23. And Jesus said to him, if I can, all things are possible for one who believes. Think about that promise. That all things are possible for one who believes. God's going to do things for his purpose and for his glory. But the only thing that stops us from seeing some of those blessings is a lack of imagination on our side. Close with this. One of the most amazing people that have ever walked this earth was a guy by the name of George Mueller. Many of you are familiar with this story. Many of you will know this from VeggieTales. George Mueller was a guy who basically his life was founded on the hope that he had in Jesus and that he would cling to the hope in everything. And so in England, he set up an orphanage. And one day, they didn't have any food. And what he did was he gathered the kids around at the table and they prayed. And there was a knock on the door after they finished praying. It was the baker in the town. He said, I woke up and I had this horrible feeling that you didn't have anything to eat, so I brought you bread. And then, after the baker left, there was another knock on the door. In those days, they didn't have refrigerated trucks. There was a guy who was carrying milk, fresh milk, that would spoil and go bad, and the wagon broke in front of the orphanage. And the guy said, look, I can't fix the wagon without unloading this stuff, and it's going to spoil. Can you use some milk? And God provided. See, here's the thing about hope. Hope comes when we trust that our anchor will hold secure. You have an anchor that will hold secure. But you need to trust Jesus. So you need to stop trusting the things of this world. If you want to find hope, you need to put away the things that we put our hope in and we trust. We put our hope and trust in Jesus Christ. What we have is not just the hope that comes in this life. Because this life is just a temporary moment, but a vapor. Instead, we get to look forward to something like this. Revelations verse 21, verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. There shall be no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, for the former things have passed away. You want to talk about a promise? You want to talk about a promise for hope? Is that if I attach my anchor to Jesus Christ, that I get to look forward to a future where there is no more crying. There's a lot of tears in my house. And then there's my kids too. They cry too. And no more death. Isn't that the greatest tragedy in this world? Neither shall there be any mourning. And no more pain. This life is hard. And oftentimes leads us hopeless. But I can tell you where we can find hope, a hope that will go beyond all understanding, a hope that will go beyond the circumstances of this world, a hope that we get to cling to, that if it doesn't get right in this life, but don't get me wrong, it will get better in this life. It'll be far better to come when we take our anchor and we bind it to Jesus. I don't know what you're struggling with. I don't know what you are going through. I don't know the hurt, the pain, the suffering, the doubts, all those things. Put away the things of this world that bring you temporary hope. The things that help you forget your problems, the things that help you escape, put them away and bind your anchor to the one thing that will never lie to you or let you down. Seek him. This time I'm going to come and we're going to have an invitation. You need to tie your anchor to something. You don't know how that looks, but you're saying, I'm ready. Come down and pray with me. Maybe you're afraid to stand up in front of people, or maybe you're watching online. For those of you who are here, you can just pull me aside after service, or if you need to, just go to our website and just contact us. There's a page, there's a prayer request link, and just put in the prayer request and just say, I want more hope. Someone from the church will be in contact with you. If you need hope, I know a place where you can get an abundance of it that will never let you down. And that is when we tie our anchor to Jesus Christ.